Mom's Playground. Hooray!
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Our guest is 1/5 of the Broken Lizard comedy troupe, best known for his role as Thorny in the cult classic movie Super Troopers. Appearing this weekend at Coastal Creative in St. Petersburg, Florida, July 6th, 7th, and 8th. Comedian, director, actor, Jay Chandrasekhar. Did I pronounce that correctly, Jay?
You did.
Okay, because I would imagine when you were in school, you didn't get a lot of luck with the teachers getting your name right.
Every single teacher got it wrong. Every single one.
Every single one. Yeah.
The guy who taught the history of India. He just zipped it off, no problem. You know, it's funny when I talk to like tech support, I don't even spell it. I just say it and they go, boom, perfect pronunciation. And they don't even ask me to spell it. They know it right away.
You're from Chicago, one of my favorite cities in the world. I love Chicago. Are you a Portillo's guy?
Yeah, I mean, of course. They've actually opened a Portillo's out in L.A.
Really?
Yeah. Portillo's is just an excellent Chicago spot, no doubt.
And I can tell you, with your time in St. Petersburg, there is a Portillo's nearby in St. Pete.
No way.
So you're set.
You own a piece of Portillo's? Is that why you're plugging them so hard?
I wish. If I could get some kind of deal with a big B for a combo for life, I'd plug them forever. So being from Chicago, tell me a little bit about your mom and dad and what they did.
Well, my dad was a lung disease specialist, and my mom was a radiologist. They worked at different hospitals. And, you know, all my uncles and aunts were doctors. And so it was basically just doctors everywhere all the time when I was a little kid. And I would just sit there and listen to them speak in that, it's called medicalese. It's basically just this language of medicine. And I always thought, I'd be a heart surgeon, but then I took organic chemistry in college, and it met at 8 a.m. 5 days a week, and that really conflicted with my drinking schedule, and I never quite. I just couldn't. I got a C-, and there was no real way to. Short of stopping drinking, which I didn't seem to be able to or want to do, I just couldn't get. They were weeding me out, basically. They were like, if you can't get up at 8 a.m. 5 days a week, you're not going to be a doctor anyway. So that was that.
Wow. You know, I have a good friend from India, and he kind of tells me all the time, he's actually going through a dilemma right now where his mother wants to set him up with an arranged marriage, but he's not ready to do it yet. But he tells me all the time, from the time that he was very young, his parents pushed him hard into, school, study, tutoring. Were your parents like that to you growing up?
Not much, not really. I mean, it was less overt pressure, really. I mean, they both were number one in their classes in subsequent years in medical school. So that was the pressure, was like, well, what's wrong with you?
Right.
I mean, I was number 7, which was,
pretty good. Yeah.
Pretty good. I mean, but, I applied to, when I graduated high school, I applied to, the entire Ivy League. And I had a B+ average. And my dad was like, he's like, why would they want a junky B+ Indian when they have all these A+ Indians? And I was like, that's fucking right. And he was right. They didn't let me in.
Well, because the answer to the question, Dad, is because I'm fun. I'm a lot more fun than those other guys.
Right, but the Ivy League doesn't give a shit, apparently.
Right.
But that's okay. I went to Colgate, and that was a good school, and I did well there and started a comedy group. So, boom.
So, Jay, I got to ask, with your parents being in the medical field, were they a little pissed off that you were like going to college, on track to becoming a heart surgeon, and then it was like, hey guys, I'm going to try this comedy thing out? I mean, did it break their heart? Were they discouraging, or were they supportive?
They just wanted me to have a backup plan when it failed.
Okay.
They just were like, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out? Really, when it doesn't work out.
Right.
And I said, I'll go to law school. My sister went to law school, and I'm like, I'll give it 3 years, and if it's not happening, I'll go to law school. And they were like, okay, fine. And so, those 3 years, we had enough success every year that I never quite had to even bother, taking the LSAT or even getting serious about law school. It never happened.
So let me ask you a question real quick. Do you use a lot of streaming platforms? And if the answer is yes, do you know what Rocket Money is? And have you ever seen those specials? It's like, hey, for the first 3 months, 99 cents for this streaming network. And you're like, oh, yeah, great. And then after 3 months of 99 cents, I forget that in the fine print, it goes to $14.99 a month after that. And I can't tell you how many streaming services I have, probably somewhere around 8, maybe 9. I know, a little bit of a TV problem. So let me tell you about Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, and it monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills all in one place. It's so easy, too. You download the app, you put in your credit card, and basically keep or cancel whatever services you want. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/jobber. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/jobber, rocketmoney.com/jobber. So tell me what got you interested in comedy to begin with. Who was it? Was there a certain guy in your life? Was there a certain comedian that was, your idol, or a guy that you just really wanted to be just like?
Well, I'm from Chicago, and there's a big, improv sort of Second City scene there. And a great number of the original Saturday Night Live people came out of Chicago, Bill Murray, Belushi, Aykroyd, all those people ran through Chicago. And so it was part of the culture there. And then I saw Richard Pryor live on a videotape. It's called Richard Pryor Live. It's in Long Beach. And I was like, wow, that's a job. And then I saw Eddie Murphy when I was about 15, Delirious.
Yeah.
In the last row of the Chicago theater. And I'm like, that's incredible. And I just sort of, I was a Monty Python fan and a Steve Martin fan. And I got a lot of laughs with my friends, and I started acting in plays in high school, and I did that in college. And it just sort of felt like the right thing to try, even though there were really no Indians in show business. Ben Kingsley was the only one. He played Gandhi.
Yeah, he wasn't a very funny man, right?
No, and the way Gandhi ended, they weren't going to make a sequel to that one. So it was. When they wanted Indians in movies, they hired, they put a white guy in brown face. And I was like, huh. I mean, so it was even higher. The odds were even more stacked against me because even when they wanted an Indian, they didn't use one. So I figured I'd have to make my own way, kind of. I figured the only way I'm going to get in there is if I write my own scripts. And put a guy with my voice into the middle of it and my accent in the middle of it, and then I'll direct it and force myself into the movie. Okay,
so you got serious about acting and comedy while you were in high school. So tell me a little bit about how you formed and quote unquote, met the guys from Broken Lizard.
Well, I went to Chicago my junior year, and I took the semester, and I lived in Chicago, and I went to college at Loyola to try to get credits. I took a semester off Colgate, and I did improv comedy with, I mean, at the time Chris Farley was there and Dave Keckner was there, and I was in classes with those guys. Even though I was the lowest improviser in Chicago, they were the highest. I was the lowest. And I said to myself, if I can make strangers laugh, I will give show business a try. And so I got into this improv group with all these, accountants and moms.
Right.
Give it a try. And we would do shows in front of audiences, and they would just bomb hopelessly. No laughs. And I was like, well, that's not working, and it's not necessarily my fault. But this is not entertaining, I thought. And so I wrote 10 minutes of stand-up jokes, and I signed up for an open mic, and I did the jokes, and they got laughs. And I thought, okay, I made strangers laugh, okay. And I kept doing stand-up, and I kept doing improv, and the improv didn't work, and the stand-up did. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give show business a try when I graduate. And I get back to Colgate. It's my senior year, and this guy who started a thing called the Kinetic Theater Group, he was a student-run theater group, and he was going to London for the semester, and he asked me, he said, I want to keep my theater group running. I'm going to do 4 one-act plays while I'm in London. Can you do one of them? Do that improv thing you were telling me about when you started an improv comedy group. And what he was referring to is that when I got back to Colgate after Chicago, I was bragging about what a good improviser I was.
Right.
And nobody at school would ever know. And I'm like, yeah, I know Chris Farley, and he was Saturday Night Live, and I'm like talking a big game. And he's like, you should do this improv group. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's a good idea. And so I called my friend Kevin Heffernan, who was in my fraternity house. And I'm like, hey, man, you want to do an improv group? I got an opportunity to do that. And he goes, an improv group? No way. No, I don't want to do an improv group because all our friends will laugh at us. They'll make fun of us. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I called the guy. I'm like, we're not doing it. And he goes, oh, okay. And so then over the summer, I'm like, I go to the Grateful Dead. I go to 4 shows. I drop a little acid. I'm feeling a little soft brain. And he calls me again, and he goes, hey, man, I really need you to do that improv group. I'm going to London. I need 4 one-act plays. I got 3, you're the 4th. And I'm like, yeah, let me call Heffernan. So I call Kevin, and he's a dishwasher in Nantucket. And I'm like, hey, pal, we're going to do that improv show. And he goes, I already said we're not doing it. I'm not doing it. No fucking way. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I call the guy. I'm like, we're not doing it. And then now it's senior year. I'm in like my fraternity house, and the payphone rings, and one of the pledges is like, hey, it's this guy calling from London. And I'm like, oh, man. And I get on the phone. He goes, it's a done deal. You're doing the improv group. It's a done deal.
Wow.
And I'm like, all right. And so I go up to Heffernan's room, and I'm like, it's a done deal. We're doing the improv group. And he goes, fine, fuck it. And so that's when we started. And so we started doing improv. I put together a group of like the 8 funniest people I knew at Colgate.
Right.
Forced some of them to do it. And we started doing these improv games, and it was hard to say. Like, I was the worst improviser in Chicago teaching all these Colgate kids how to do improv. And it was unclear. Like, there was no audience there in our practices to laugh or not. And we were like, is this funny? Is this funny? We don't know. And finally, I'm like, you know what? We're going to stop this. We're going to turn into a sketch group. We're going to do what Saturday Night Live did.
Right.
Those guys, I said, we're writers. We write history and English papers all the time. We can write sketches. And so we switched and became a sketch group. And there was one of the kids I'd hired was an LA guy. And he goes, why don't we make short films too? I can direct them. And this guy, his name is Ted Griffin. He's written like Ocean's 13 and all
wow.
the other movies. And he directed 2 really well-made little shorts. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. And so it was a combination of those sketches and those short films that sort of informed what we eventually became, which was like we were trying to become Monty Python.
It's crazy though, Jay, like this, telling me this story, it almost sounds like this wasn't, this wasn't going to happen. It was like a force of nature that made this happen. Now, we're not going to do it. You asked Hefferman, hey, let's do this sketch group. No, he doesn't want to do it. And it just seems like the more people said no, your guy in London kept calling and saying, you're going to do this. It just like willed it upon you. I mean, I shouldn't even know who Farva is. And shouldn't even know what a liter of cola is. But right. I do, and it's crazy.
A miracle. It's a miracle. And the guy, his name's Jonathan Glasser. The last big show he wrote for was Succession. He's
a real writer.
Yeah, he's working. He's doing well. So it's I owe him everything.
That's awesome. Tell me what you think. Okay, so we talked about how Broken Lizard was formed. What do you consider? And I'm gonna move into Super Troopers because I'm gonna say, not knowing more of the story than I already know, I'd have to say Super Troopers had to be your big break. Would you consider that correct? Or is there something else in between Broken Lizard and Super Troopers that you would consider your big break?
Well, I suppose it is the big break. I mean, yeah, it was the big break. It was the one that, got us. I mean, we sold it for 3 times what we made it. So we made our investors money, and we made money, and then Searchlight made an immense amount of money.
Yeah.
And then everybody else was like, well, these guys make money, so let's give them more movies. Like, that's all show business is. Like, if you do well financially, people go, oh, we want to do well financially in the next one, and they just give you another chance.
So was it, tell me a little bit about Super Troopers. How did the idea, and did you have the idea for a long time, and how long did it take to make? How did that whole thing get rolling? Well,
we made a film called Puddle Cruiser, which was at Sundance, and 3 years earlier, and Harvey Weinstein at Miramax almost bought that film, but then didn't, and said, I'm going to buy your next film. So he said, write me a funny movie. And we were like, whoa, what about what? And he goes, what do you mean about what? Anything you want to write about. Bring me a pitch and we'll make a movie. And so we were up at a wedding on the border of Vermont, and we were sort of watching the driving by cops who pulled over teenagers, and we were like, the dynamic was so funny in the country at the time because there were all these like white boys in basements, like gangster rapping, talking about popping caps and asshole, whatever. And yet when they get pulled over, they were like these nice suburban boys. So we thought, oh, that's kind of a funny dynamic. So let's make a movie about the Vermont Highway Patrol that has nothing to do, because there's no crime. They just fuck with kids.
Right.
And fuck with people. And so that was sort of the origin of it. And we took that to Miramax, and they're like, sounds good. And so we wrote it. And, Harvey eventually read it and was like, because I'm terrible with comedy. I never know what's funny. I never know. He goes, so I'm not going to make your movie, but I am going to let you take it out of here and make it with somebody else, which I don't have to do. But I'm going to do that.
Wow. Well, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, he was a monster, and he was a rapist and all that. But he also...
Yeah, well, there is that. Yeah, I know.
He also was a skilled producer.
Right.
And he also is the reason Super Troopers exists.
Right.
And so we took it around. We couldn't get anyone to do it. None of the studio... I mean, Clooney jumped on to exec produce, and he couldn't get the money, and Danny DeVito jumped on, he couldn't get the money. Eventually we found a single investor. He was a father of a friend of mine who wanted to get into the film business. He read it, and he goes, I'll give you $1.2 million to make it. And we were like, $1.2 million? Wow. I mean, that was 6 times as much as our first film cost.
Wow, okay.
So we were like, yeah, we'll do it. And we made it. And, went to Sundance, went back to Sundance, and then sold it to Fox Searchlight. And, they bought it for like 3.5, and then they made about 20 theatrically and about, at this point over 120 million on home video.
Oh my God. So it's just, such a cult classic. I just watched it again the other night. It doesn't matter if it's on TV, what time it's on TV. If it's on, I'm stopping, I'm watching it. And it's become such a cult classic. My big question is, after the huge success of Super Troopers, how come it took almost 20 years to make a sequel? Was it your choice? Was it funding? Because I do know for a minute there was like a crowdfunding type of situation going on where you were trying to make the movie and raise the money to make it yourself. Why weren't people jumping to make a Super Troopers 2?
Well, they were, but we didn't want to. If we only made that movie, the second movie right away, we would have been like the Police Academy guys.
Right. Got it.
That's all they did.
Got it.
We've now made, 9 movies.
Right.
2 of them are Super Troopers, and we'll make another one. But, we got Beer Fest and Club Dread and, all these
Slam and
movies.
Salmon was one of my faves.
So we're kind of like, we made a decision. And then by the time we wanted to make it, it had been too long. And Searchlight was like, I'm not sure the audience is still there. So we did a crowdfunding campaign, and we raised like $5.4 million from like 55,000 people. And we proved that the audience was still there. And Searchlight jumped back in, and, they did well with that movie, too.
And you're talking about, I do hear that a Super Troopers 3, I don't know if it's in the works, or you just said there will be another one. Is that?
Yeah. We're on strike right now, but as soon as we're off that, we're going to make Super Troopers 3.
You're on strike. Oh, tell me about that. I love strike.
Well, the Writers Guild is on strike.
Oh, okay.
So,
got it.
Until it settles, which it'll probably settle in like around Labor Day. And then we'll get back to work.
Okay, man, that is so cool. I'm just I'm fascinated by the film industry. I definitely had aspirations of being in it when I was younger. Had no idea about all the ins and outs, and it just seems like right place, right time with a lot of people. And, little by little, you meet the right people and you figure it out.
Yeah, that's about right.
So back to, tell me, I didn't ask you this, Jay. Your first job, what was it?
I was an ice cream man for the Good Humor Company. So.
Really?
Yeah, I drove around a big metal truck and sold ice cream.
So your first job, you were...
I was 18, and I, got a truck and did it in the summer, and, just kind of...
Do you know who you have? You have that in common with a billionaire. Do you know who that is?
No.
Mr. Wonderful from the Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary. His first job was an ice cream man.
I was the only ice cream man who didn't sell beer and weed. The other drivers would be like, "Hey man, can I get a 12-pack of Budweiser?" I'm like, "Of what?" They're like, I'm out of Budweiser. I need Budweiser. I'm like, "What? For what?" They're like, "Just sell it." And I was like, "Oh, you sell beer?" I'm like, "They're like, yeah. How do you make a living?" And I'm like, "I sell ice cream."
Man, have you ever thought about? Have you ever thought about, because I know you would definitely not have been an ice cream man if things didn't work out for you. You're a lot smarter than that, Jay. But have you ever thought about, because, you're telling me this story, and to me, like I said earlier, it seems like it shouldn't have happened. Everything was kind of like stacked against you to where, nobody wanted to get involved with your sketch comedy group or your improv group. It just seemed like the cards were stacked against you. Do you ever think about if Broken Lizard and Super Troopers never happened, you ever think that maybe you'd be, defending some scumbag, that was smoking crack in a library? Or you ever think about what you might be doing today? Would you probably been?
It's funny. I never thought about it.
Really?
It never occurred to me. I guess it just never occurs to me.
It doesn't have to.
Obviously, it should, but it doesn't. I just haven't thought about it. But you're right. I guess I'd be a lawyer of some sort. I'm sure I would have.
It's just kind of funny that it's like sometimes it's a series of events that happens to a guy that gets him on everybody's radar, gets him famous, becomes who they are. But, if that break never occurred, you'd be, you could have been just a regular ham and egger like me.
Sure. Yeah.
That's kind of, I just find that like really interesting. Right place, right time. This big thing happens. If right place, right time, the big thing never happened, who knows?
Sure.
Tell me about stand-up. Has stand-up always been something you love to do? Do you do it all the time? Is this a return to stand-up? Do you kind of?
I've been doing stand-up since I was 19. It's a great way to control the method of delivery because it's just, with films, there are a lot of people you got to raise money from and talk to and convince and cajole. And with stand-up, you just walk out there with your mic and you just tell the story.
Right.
And if you think it's funny, you can prove it by doing it.
Right.
So I find it to be a very, very satisfying way to perform. And I like to tell stories, and they're often dirty stories, and they're often smart stories, and they're smart and dirty, and that's my favorite thing.
Is it difficult these days, like post-COVID? I think like the world has changed over the last 5 years, but really over the last 3 years. Do you find comedy is harder to do when you're, no?
I don't really worry about that.
You don't?
I say what I want to say, and I think the most important element of it is to understand what you're saying and stand behind it.
Own it.
I don't really worry about because I'm not an idiot. I'm not trying to insult people for comedy. I'm just trying to. I do say provocative things, but they're not like. I don't think I end up really coming after anybody in particular.
Jay, thanks so much. It was great talking to you, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye now.
This weekend, Jay is performing at Coastal Creative in St. Petersburg. For a list of all of his tour dates, you can go to jaychandrasekhar.com. Information on his podcast, Mustache Tales, and you could even get a signed copy of Jay's book, which is titled Mustache Shenanigans. Once again, all up on his website, jaychandrasekhar.com. So his parents were in the medical field. His father was a lung specialist, his mother a radiologist. They didn't really push him into becoming a doctor, but he started off wanting to be a heart surgeon. That's what he thought he was going to be. And then comedy seeped in, and he began loving that while he was in high school. I kind of figured, with Indian parents focusing really on education and becoming a doctor, that is part of their culture, that they would maybe not be supportive to Jay for his choice of wanting to abandon medical school. They just, they wanted him to have a backup plan if his comedy career didn't work out. And his backup plan was to become a lawyer. He said he has some sisters and a lot of other family members that are lawyers. It didn't have to happen, though. Of course, Broken Lizard comedy troupe kind of took off with the success of the movie Super Troopers. That was his big break. Undeniable. And I did kind of find it interesting that Jay's first job was the same first job as the billionaire investor Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from the Shark Tank. Ice Cream Man. How do you like that? Jay Chandrasekhar, if not for the movie Super Troopers, might have been a lawyer. Not a real bad backup plan, though, is it? As always, thanks for listening to the Celebrity Jobber podcast. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. For all past episodes, you can check out celebrityjobber.com. Please follow us on Instagram at Celebrity Jobber Podcast. And you can stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. Another episode of the Celebrity Jobber podcast is in the books. Thanks again for listening. Until next week, I'm Jeff Zito.
The podcast playground. Hooray!